Itch it up, my selector.
Due to some violent content, parental discretion is advised.
I know you gonna dig this.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is the one and only Joe Habib, who's with me, Maestro A. We're here to talk boxing. This is another Saturday edition of Sucker Punch. We got a double show lined up for you back to back, like Drake. All right. And we're going to start off by talking about Conor Benn and what's been going on, where things are right now, and where things might be headed in terms of potential matchups. We're going to get into that right now. This is Saturday. It is Punchlines, Sucker Punch, I should say, with Joe Habib and yours truly. So we're going to get right into it and talk about all things Conor Benn, potentially Chris Eubank Jr., potentially Mario Barrios. Joe Habib, get us started here. Go for it.
So this is really, really interesting, and maybe not all of American boxing fans really care about this whole situation because not everyone is tapped into the UK scene over in boxing. But definitely, if you're a diehard, and definitely if you're a fan of UK boxing, if you're a fan of Conor Benn or if you're a fan of Chris Eubank Jr., you're interested in this and you're following this story. And you and I have been talking about this and following this. And I believe both of us really weren't crazy interested in this Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank Jr. fight. Like, we were kind of agnostic to it. Like, if it happened, it's no big deal. And if it didn't happen, we weren't going to be like, oh, damn, this is a fight that had to happen. And but again, we're not. You've lived in the UK, but we're more or less tapped into the American boxing scene. Although we watch it all, we don't really buy into the whole thing where the history and the fathers and this and that. We're looking at the significance of the fight in terms of traditional boxing standards. You got a guy who's a welterweight, and a guy who's a middleweight, and the guy who's at middleweight actually fought as high as super middleweight. So the size disparity. To me, obviously it's a big money fight in the UK. There'll be diehards in the US watching it, but to me, if you're Chris Eubank Jr., this is a great payday, but you have more to lose. Like, if Conor Benn loses, he can say, "Hey, you know what? I lost to the bigger guy. I can go back down to 147. I'm the younger fighter. I got more career ahead of me. I can keep going." But with Chris Eubank Jr., if he loses to Conor Benn, they're going to be like, oh, damn, you lost to a welterweight who doesn't have a ton of experience, right? So I just find it interesting that, the history with obviously both of the fathers and how this turned into such a grudge match. And we also have the whole drug test situation that kind of added a little bit more fuel to the fire, so to speak. But I think Conor Benn has the more intriguing fights on the table for him. Whereas Chris Eubank Jr., I don't hate the Islandi Lara fight, but I find the Conor Benn versus Mario Barrios fight a lot more intriguing because I think that the style matchups would make for a more entertaining fight. And, you know, we've seen Chris Eubank Jr. fight for titles before. He's come up short. We've never seen Conor Benn take that next step. So that in itself adds a little bit more allure to the fight. So that's why I'm more excited about Conor Benn potentially fighting Mario Barrios as opposed to Chris Eubank Jr. fighting Islandi Lara, because I don't think that, you know, those two styles would mesh up great. And I don't hate that fight, but I actually like Conor Benn's fight better. And I still don't know if the, you know, Canelo Alvarez fight is off the table for Chris Eubank Jr., because I know Canelo Alvarez, they did confirm, Eddie Reynoso did confirm that an offer was made, but they were kind of miffed at the fact that Chris Eubank Jr. turned it down and wanted more money. And then they came out and said, well, that fight is off the table. We'll never fight him again. I'm not so sure if someone steps in like a Turki Al-Sheikh, if that fight is 100% off the table. It could still be on the table. So
I agree.
There's a lot of moving parts here, Maestro. And
there are a lot of moving parts. And look, I, at the beginning, I was not that interested in Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn. I think I called it a meaningless fight, and I said that because I know I have a lot of people in the UK that watch my channels, enjoy my content, and people, you know, they reached out to me and are like, "Listen, Maestro, you don't know how big this fight is. I you lived in the UK, but you lived in the UK as an adult. You know, if you grew up here as a kid, you would have understood the significance more of Chris Eubank Sr. and Nigel Benn." And I have to acknowledge that. You know, you pointed to the fact that I used to live in the UK. I did used to live in the UK. My half of my family, it came to, well, one side of my family came to North America through the UK, and but my childhood was spent in North America, and in North America, you know, Chris Eubank Jr. was not a star. Nigel Benn was not a star. Neither are part of the world, you know, International Boxing Hall of Fame, which is pretty surprising when you think about it. You know, given some of the people that have gotten in, I think that definitely Chris Eubank Sr. should be in the International Boxing Hall of Fame, as far as I'm concerned. But the fight has grown, I think, believe it or not, because of a lot of this controversy with Conor Benn, with the failed drug test and the fact that the fight was canceled, and then all of the back and forth and the animosity and Simon Jordan getting into the mix and saying all kinds of different things that I agree with. And I'm not a fan of Conor Benn. I'll say this quite clearly. If the two fight, I like Chris Eubank Jr. more. I like his style. I like his charisma. I like his sense of humor. I like what he brings to the game. Some of his trolling has been, I would say, top tier in the sport of boxing. I remember the KFC stuff, right, with the chicken, and I mean, there's so many examples of it. He's made me chuckle. He's made me laugh. He's made me at times burst out laughing with some of this stuff. I like Chris Eubank Jr., right? And my thing with this fight, even saying that, is that I think that a lot of the stuff about Conor Benn has actually been unfair. I'm going to show a quick clip for us to respond to real quick. This was Eddie Hearn speaking to IFL TV about some of this situation, and let's chime in a little bit on this, Joe. Let's have
John went at it again over Conor Benn. Can you almost see where Simon's coming from in terms of we still don't understand how it got into the system? That's the sort of question he's asking.
What he's saying is that we should break the confidentiality of the hearing. Because his argument is, well, who cares what they're going to do about it? It's like, do we want to be in a position where we break the confidentiality that we've signed up for? And anything could happen. Once you breach that, there are ramifications. Now he's saying, yeah, but they won't do anything, will they? I'd rather not fucking find out, to be honest. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to give you enough information. And I've done it with him before, because he came out and he said, people actually missed this. He apologized in a way for getting it wrong. And he goes, "Oh yeah, I know I said that about jurisdiction, and that was flawed. So it's flawed means you were wrong." Yeah. So I've already come out, probably said too much, and said, "Just want to confirm because it's pissing me off. The result had nothing to do with jurisdiction." Oh, well, what? I said, all the facts were heard. That's what the key thing for you to know is. All the facts were heard, and he was cleared. The cleared thing drives me mental, right? He goes, "Yeah, we know that he was, cleared and exonerated of any wrongdoing, but he wasn't cleared, was he?" He's like, "What the fuck? What do you mean he wasn't cleared? That's like going to a court for a crime. They hear all the facts and say not guilty, and everyone going, yeah, but he's not really not guilty, is he? I mean, he's not cleared, is he really? Yes, he's a free man. He's walking from the court. Conor Benn is a free man, cleared of any wrongdoing."
You know,
So we'll
Maestro,
leave it at that. Go for it, Joe.
What this all boils down to is people's personal opinions on the situation being interjected into the facts and in their minds superseding the actual facts and data. So this is opinion versus fact. Now, a lot of people are of the belief that strict liability, right? Meaning, even if it was contamination, doesn't matter. You're still responsible, whatever. And I'm of the belief.
Agree with that.
I don't agree with that, and I know you don't agree with that. I'm of the belief that each crime has like manslaughter is not the same as first-degree murder. So the punishment should fit the crime, or in this case, the intent. And it's very easy if you're taking supplements, if you're taking anything, that you could be subject to contamination. And I'm consistent on this. I've done the research on this. And again, it doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong. It's my opinion. And there are some people who share my opinion who do have higher knowledge of the situation than me. And I agree with these people. So the small amount that was in his system, if you were to take it exogenously, if you were to take that clomiphene exogenously, you could not have that small amount. If you took the drug at the recommended dose in the amount that you're supposed to be taking it, you would not have that minuscule amount. I've been consistent. I think Ryan Garcia's situation was contamination. I think Conor Benn's situation was contamination. So you hear Simon Jordan keep saying strict liability, strict liability, strict liability. But again, even within these testing organizations where it's UCAD, where it's VADA doesn't adjudicate, but let's just say in America, the commissions, they hand out the punishments differently based on intent and based on if they believe it was contamination, or if they believe he purposely, knowingly took the substance. And in this case, all this investigation stemmed around looking at the evidence to try to determine if this was basically contamination, or if he knowingly took the substance. So it never, right from the jump, it never was, jurisdiction. And even in the Dillian White situation, where he was taking supplements and he tested positive for stimulants, they took that into account when he went before UCAD, right?
100%.
And they cleared him as a result of that. So,
and you know what the difference with that is there, Joe, to cut you off, and I apologize, but I really want to make this point. VADA does not have the same authority as UCAD. So in that case, UCAD was doing the testing. Something happened. They held a hearing because they can actually do their own investigations. They can issue their own rulings. And if you remember, this was before the fight with the Colombian guy based out of Montreal. I forget his name off the top of my head. But the fight was allowed to proceed, right? Mm-hmm. The issue with the Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. thing was that it was under VADA. He had never tested negatively under UCAD, and they couldn't have the hearing right before the fight and make a decision because VADA is unable to do that. So I just wanted to clear that up. Go for it.
So this term strict liability, even within WADA protocol, there is statutes in there where if it's determined that you did not knowingly take it, it doesn't call for an automatic suspension. Inadvertent use there's a clause in the WADA statutes there, right? It says inadvertent use. So again, everyone wants to paint these failed drug tests with a broad brush. Everything's the same. And that's just not how it works. Because people don't understand, first of all, the substances. They don't understand how they're all different. There's different PEDs that do different things. So it would be like catching someone for marijuana and charging them as if they had cocaine on them. They're two different substances. So we can differentiate that when we're looking at drug situations with recreational drugs. Why can't we apply that same logic to PEDs, right? That whole clomiphene thing, like no athlete is saying, let me go take clomiphene, thinking that I'm going to conquer the world here, that this is going to turn me into Superman. It was the same thing with the Ostarine situation. Like these are very low level drugs that if you look at the history of this stuff, like if he tested positive for EPO or HGH, or if he was doing TRT, you can't look at this and put that in the same context as that.
I agree.
And then
I agree. It's like when Keyshawn Davis faced consequences for testing positive for marijuana. I mean, okay, I guess certain people agree that you shouldn't be smoking. Okay, but what does that have to do with giving him an enhancement before a fight?
And here's the thing too, Maestro, and I hate beating a dead horse here, but when you take these substances, there's a level of the drug, there's an amount of the drug that you need to take to benefit from it, and you just can't take it one time. You have to cycle it, right? So it's not effective at a minuscule dose if you take it the week of the fight or even 2 weeks before the fight. You need to cycle these drugs. And even then, clomiphene and Ostarine, they're not these go-to drugs. That's why, let me just get this out. I apologize. That's why when Chris Eubank Jr. did the research himself and his team did the research himself, they were prepared to go through with the fight because they weren't concerned about this.
Yeah, they talked to medical doctors. And my point for bringing all of this up, Joe, is twofold. Number one, it's still being talked about in the UK. That clip was from late last night, I believe. Definitely the last 24 hours. And people are still talking about that. It's been 2 years. That's number one. And it's made the fight bigger. Because it's a theme, it's a narrative. But number two, it should be unequivocally clear at this point that despite what Simon Jordan is saying, this fight can happen. This fight is good to go. Conor Benn has been cleared of all wrongdoing related to what happened. What was it? 2 years ago now? A little over 2 years ago.
This whole incident started in October of 2022.
Yeah, so over 2 years ago. So the road has been opened for this fight. So that issue is gone. Now the issue at hand is financial at this point. It's not drug related. It's financial. And apparently what's happening, and I'm going to point to another clip right here that for everybody to really have a look at with my guy Napper, again with Eddie Hearn, again from IFL TV, discussing the financial impediments related to this fight happening. So we've cleared the roadblock as it relates to the drugs. I think that's clear, right, Joe? Right. So the remaining roadblock to this fight is the financial one. We'll get into talking about this after we see this clip. Let's have a look. Let's have a listen. Let's go.
He knows the number already. You know the number that Chris wants.
Eubank's always easy to negotiate with, isn't he? Do you know
what I mean? Nothing difficult. You know the numbers: 55%, 45. Let's go.
55, 45. They do think like. Why is that? Why?
Chris is way bigger. He's earned way more money than Conor in his career.
I mean, he's definitely earned more money because he's about 42 years old.
Money.
Yeah,
he's been
fighting for about 10 years longer than Conor.
He's not 42. This is not a comedy stand-up show. He's 35. He's $1 million in his life.
That's actually incorrect. Secondly,
When?
actually multiple times.
When?
Multiple times.
When?
Multiple times.
Net.
He's
Net.
of course that's how he gets his money. He's headlined 3 shows for us. Also, what you have to
Notice how my man is on his business. He asked him net, right? And at the end of the day, we don't have to play much more.
You know what? You know
But
what
the
it
fact-
is?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you know what it is, Maestro, and this is my opinion, obviously, right? I believe, and this is just my speculation, if I'm not mistaken, when the fight was originally announced back in October, when it was supposed to come off in October of 2022, I believe it was 50-50.
Yeah.
But because of the whole drug testing situation, it's almost like Chris Eubank wants to punish him, Conor Benn, for putting him through that whole ordeal, meaning that when Chris Eubank Jr. was training for that fight, he had to make the catch weight, right? So he already made concessions. That's number one. So I'm making a concession, right? So I had to weaken myself, and I put my body through all that torture to make that catch weight, knowing that it's hard for me. And then the week of the fight, it all blows up in my face, and then the fight gets pulled. The rug gets pulled out from underneath me. The fight gets canceled in such short notice. So then I have to take another fight because that fight fell out. And as a result of that, I'm depleting myself even further. I've already had to deal with that situation. Now, on top of that, it becomes exacerbated and magnified because I got to go into another fight, train for another guy. I've already been depleted from that training camp trying to make that catch weight. And he may believe, and he could very well be right, and it's all speculation. This is just opinion. We don't know this for fact, but I'm just saying he could hold it against Conor Benn that he lost to Liam Smith because as a result of that, having to do that catch weight camp, right, trying to make that weight,
look the same in that fight.
It could have depleted him, and then that carryover effect could have hurt him in his fight with Liam Smith. Then I have to switch up. I'm already preparing for you. Now I gotta, and I had to do that try to make that catch weight in that camp. And then I gotta, now on short notice, I gotta scramble to get another opponent because I don't want to be inactive for even longer. So then that training camp, as I said, already damaged him probably. So now he's got to go over and fight Liam Smith, already like basically doing that hard camp and then having to start from scratch, get ready for another opponent. So he kind of upset the apple cart for Chris Eubank Jr. And he can argue, and you can argue that there was some residual effect of having to make that catch weight. So now moving forward, Chris Eubank Jr. is saying, well, you got to pay for that, right? There's no more catch weight anymore, which they've agreed to. Now you have to pay for what you did to me early in my career. I already gave you 50-50. I already made the first initial concession by agreeing to that 150.
He weighed in at the catch weight for the fans because he's like, I already did all the hard work. Yeah. Now I'm going to show you guys how ready I was for this fight, right?
So to me, this is all you got to pay for my pain and anguish. You got to compensate me for what you did, what you caused.
I think that's part of it. I think
that's
the other
part of it, in my opinion.
I think the other part of it, Joe, and I agree with you 100%, by the way. I think the other part of it, though, is what the fuck is Conor Benn really done? What has he done?
Yeah, I mean
he's not his father. This actually isn't Chris Eubank Sr. versus Nigel Benn. It's Conor Benn versus
Eubank Jr.
Eubank Jr. Thank you. Right? I get it. Your dad was a big star. We get it. But you know what else we get? His last 2 fights, right? That fight in Orlando, that fight in Vegas, and the fights before that. I mean, I'm sorry. Chris Eubank Jr. has been in bigger fights, more meaningful fights, more lucrative fights. And in addition to everything you said about having to make the weight for the first fight that didn't go through, about what happened to him after that fight against Liam Smith, he's a bigger fighter. He's a bigger fighter.
Yeah.
So honestly, when I hear them going back and forth about 55-45, that's like beyond fair to me. Like if I was starting the negotiations, we would be starting at 70-30 and working our way from there.
Let's look at it this way too.
Yeah.
People can say, well, every time Chris Eubank Jr. stepped up, he lost, right? Which is disputable, you know what I mean? Because he did beat Arthur Abraham. You know, he does have some decent wins. He's never had a marquee win, right? He beat James DeGale. That's a solid win. Arthur Abraham's a solid win. These are former champions he beat.
Even the way he dispatched of Camille Zerameta was pretty impressive in his last fight. That's a solid Camille Zerameta, solid guy.
The argument can be, well, Conor Benn really never did step up. I mean, you could argue the Chris Algieri fight. Maybe it was a
Chris Algieri was halfway out the door,
but he was halfway out the door. He wasn't a huge puncher, but a solid fighter without question. I don't want to shit on him, but then you look at the Chris Van Heerden fight. So you look at this big string of knockouts, and all of a sudden, again, you know, Conor comes back after the layoff, moves up to 154, has 2 fights above the welterweight limit.
Yeah,
fights Rodolfo Orozco. He fights Peter Dobson. Those 2 fights go the distance. He doesn't look spectacular in those fights. He looks okay. Doesn't look bad, but doesn't look great.
I would classify them as workman-like performances.
Yeah, they were workman-like, okay, decent performances, but he hasn't set the world on fire. So the argument could be, okay, yeah, I stepped up. I may have lost. I never won a major title, but you've never stepped up. And even in fights where you fought against guys who were not high-level opponents, you look less than stellar. So what evidence do you have to show us that you are on Chris Eubank Jr.'s level? Now, you could argue Chris Eubank Jr. is 35. What's Conor Benn like? What's he, 26, 27-ish? So he's still in his prime, and Chris Eubank Jr. is exiting his prime. But even with that being
28 years old.
So he's 28, and Chris Eubank Jr. is 35. But you know, who knows, like, where who knows where Conor Benn is in his career? Who knows if he hasn't peaked yet? Who knows what's going to happen when he steps up? And again, you know, people think that Mario Barrios fight is a walk in the park. I probably would. That's a 50-50 fight on paper, but I would probably edge to Mario Barrios because he's the bigger, longer, more I think,
Look,
more technical guy. I would pick Mario Barrios against Conor Benn. I don't think that's a walk in the park. So
I would definitely pick Mario Barrios over Conor Benn. I would also pick Boots Ennis over Conor Benn. I would also pick Stanionis over Conor Benn. I'd also pick Norman Jr. over Conor Benn. I've never been impressed by Conor Benn.
Yeah.
I've never been impressed by him, to be quite honest with you. Last thing I wanted to say, Joe, when I hear them going on about this, demanding a 50-50 split in this fight, even wanting this fight, because let's not forget, it's supposed to be at 160. To me, it just seems like this is a cash out fight. Cash out. Go for it, Joe.
I think style-wise, this Mario Barrios Conor Benn fight, I think the style suits Mario Barrios. You got a guy who's going to come right to you, right? He's going to walk into your jab. He's going to have to cut the distance because he's the shorter guy. He's the smaller guy, right? He's going to have to cut the distance. He's going to have to initiate the action. And Mario Barrios loves it when you take it to him. He doesn't like to have to chase you. So this style, I think, benefits Barrios more than it benefits Benn. So I think it's an interesting fight, to be honest.
Yeah, and I'll be honest as well with you and with everybody watching, as I always am. I think Mario Barrios is way more battle tested at 147 pounds. Like,
that's another guy.
It's funny because he's moved up from lower weight classes, but at 147, he's more battle tested, especially recently. There's nothing I see that Conor Benn does that's going to be more of an issue for Mario Barrios than Abel Bramos. I don't know if Conor Benn beats Abel Bramos, to be honest. I'd probably favor Abel Bramos over Conor Benn, to be quite honest. He's not Samuel Vargas. He's not Chris Van Heerden. He's not a Chris Algieri who's literally 3/4 of the way out the door.
Yeah. And you have to ask yourself, has Conor Benn really improved? And has the fights he's taken set the stage and given him the opportunity to improve? Like, he's never really been pushed in a fight against a top level guy. And you can argue that he struggled in spots against Peter Dobson. Like, Peter Dobson was winning rounds in that fight. Like, I think I scored that fight like 8-4 for Conor Benn. That was relatively competitive on my card, So I don't think that was a walk in the park. I think Conor Benn underperformed in that fight and Peter Dobson overperformed in that fight. So we have to go, if we go off, the last two fights, Conor Benn has not looked stellar. And that doesn't mean he can't raise the bar, but we still have to see it.
No, 100%. And I was actually at Pete Dobson's last fight. It was on the undercard of Boots Ennis versus Martirosyan over the summer, July, in Philadelphia at the Wells Fargo Center. He lost to Jaleel Hackett on that card. At that time, Jaleel Hackett was 8-0. Okay. Do you know what happened in Jaleel Hackett's next fight?
I don't.
Jaleel Hackett lost to Jose Roman Vasquez in his next fight. So that's the guy that Conor Benn put a workman-like performance in against.
Yeah.
A guy who lost in a fight against the guy who is of this level. He's far from world level, bro.
Yeah.
He's far from world level. So when I put all of these things together, it looks to me like this fight at 160 is an attempt to grasp the biggest bag possible that's out there, and that the demands to make this 50-50 are there because this is a cash out fight. Yeah. I could be wrong about that, but that's what I see when I look at everything that's going on in this situation. Joe, go for it.
Well, here's the thing too, like this whole notion that Conor Benn is going to just walk through Chris Eubank Jr. and knock him out. Even in that first Liam Smith fight, like it wasn't like he got starched with a one-punch knockout. That was a series of events that caused what happened to happen. And even then he got up and still was willing to fight. And he's been in there with much harder punches than Liam Smith. And even in his losses, Chris Eubank Jr., he's always been in there. He's been competitive against guys like Billy Joe Saunders and, other fights where he's lost. They've been George Groves. These were competitive fights.
Absolutely.
He was never blown out of there. And you could argue that Liam Smith fight was just an anomaly, right?
I mean, look,
what happened in the rematch? You saw what happened in the rematch. Look how one-sided the rematch was.
We know what happened leading into that fight. This happened.
Yeah, emaciated there. He looks emaciated there. Look at him.
Yeah, I mean, he was in a training camp, dieting to get down to, I believe it was 157-pound catch weight.
Yeah.
Again, this is a guy that fought at super middleweight, right? I mean, he's skin and bones here, with obviously muscle. But I mean, he went from this to jumping in with Liam Smith in his subsequent fight, and he didn't have the legs that he's known for. I mean, one thing that we've always said about Chris Eubank Jr. is the dude has a hell of a chin. He was always able to take a good shot.
That's right.
Always able to take a good shot.
So
look, in terms of the options that are on the table, let's go through some of them. We talked about the potential for this fight. If this fight doesn't happen, there are other options out there. For Chris Eubank Jr., Erislandy Lara, potentially Canelo, which you mentioned. You can talk about either of those two, Joe. And then we had a comment here in the chat from Pugilism. He actually likes the fight between Benn and Devin the Dream Haney. What are your thoughts on that matchup?
I don't hate the fight, but here's the thing. When you look at a fight with Conor Benn, like Gervonta Davis, who's a lightweight, they're talking about him fighting Conor Benn. They're talking about Devin Haney moving to 140 to 147 to fight Conor Benn. Who's going to be the A side in those fights? I know Tank Davis would be the A side in the Conor Benn fight, but Devin Haney is going to want to be the A side against Conor Benn too, because he's going to sit there and say, well, I don't care who your father is. I'm a two-time world champion. I'm an undisputed world champion. So I just think that money would be a problem in those fights, but I could be wrong. Let's see if Eddie Hearn can talk Conor Benn into maybe taking less money than he wants in those fights, because he's already come on record saying that he's not against trying to urge Conor Benn to take the 48 or the 45% against Chris Eubank Jr. He's not against him doing that, because he just looks at the big picture. Like even with that 45%, it's still an exorbitant amount of money that he probably wouldn't get somewhere else. So you could argue for Conor Benn that this Chris Eubank Jr. fight is for both men, that this fight is the biggest fight that they have out there. So should it be 50-50? Should they go back and say, let's just get this done because it's the biggest fight for both of us? But there's always going to be egos, and I think Chris Eubank Jr. it's more than ego. It's kind of like what I had to go through during the first go round with you, and that was all your fault. None of that was my fault. I did everything I was supposed to do, everything you asked me to do, and you were the one that fucked up. Whether it was inadvertent, intentional or not, you still have to carry the blame for that first fight not going off. And as a result of that, I want to be compensated for my inconvenience, for my loss, for the residual effect you had on my career moving forward at that point in time. You really affected me during that time period, and I want you to pay for that. Right?
Well, his manager's standing firm on it. Let's hear a little more on this. Here we go.
Understand is without each other, they don't have this kind of opportunity, right? I know that we can talk about the Canelo fight. With all due respect to Conor, Canelo up at 168 is a different kind of challenge, right? The reality is sometimes, and I'm not trying to talk you into taking 50-50, right? Because I've been here so many times before, whether it's Froxgroves, whether it's Frampton Quigg, whether it's all these different things. And sometimes you get two fighters who go, Chris, I am not taking less than 55%. And Conor, there is no way I'm taking a fight unless it's 50-50. And sometimes that's the reality of the people that you deal with. There's arguments on both sides as to why. It just comes down to a level head where sometimes, like I might be saying to Conor, listen, I think you're worth 50% every day of the week. But sometimes you have to take a little bit less. Or you have that conversation with Chris. Now, that conversation is harder with Chris because he has had his big paydays. He's got the money in the bank. And out of principle, he may lose the fight out of principle. Do you know what I mean? Which is a dumb thing. No. Yeah, but if you had Chris, you would not do 50-50 with Ben. If Ben was elsewhere, I would be saying to you, Bank, listen here. You may be worth 55%. You're going to make, and you know the numbers, you're going to make all this fucking money to fight a little old welterweight, right? Do yourself a favor, slap yourself down the chops, and fucking sign it, son. Yeah, that's what I've signed it because you're saying it's a welterweight, but that's not his value. His value is more than Conor's. Forget about the weight. But that's your opinion. Without each other, this is a massive fight. I want the fight to happen. Chris wants the fight to happen. Yeah, cool. But the reality is someone's got to give, right? And if they don't give, they're both plonkers and they both lose the chance to make more money than they could ever dream of on one night. Look after Conor on your side. You got a lot of money.
There you go.
Can I be honest with you, man? The more I think about the situation,
I love the way my man Napa handled that, man.
Yeah, the more I think about the situation, like I kind of think at some point I do think Conor Benn's side will make concession, whether it's
Eddie admitted it right there. He's been in the bigger nights. He's earned the bigger purses. You know what that's called? That's called data, bro. Those are the numbers. So
whether they do like 52, if they do like 52-48, you know what I'm saying? Like
I mean, you know what I would do? I would do 40-40 split with a winner getting a 20% bonus. If they want to insist on the 50-50. Do you really believe in yourself? Right? 35-35, right? With the winner getting a 30% bonus. Because you know what? To me, that's clear. The winner's going to be Chris Eubank Jr. To me, this is like one of the most one-sided fights that people have been talking about.
I don't think Conor Benn wins the fight.
It's a one-sided fight.
I feel pretty confident that Ben probably beats him. I would pick him by knockout. You know,
that Ben beats him.
I mean, excuse me, that Eubank beats him.
Okay,
I meant to say.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Eubank on this one.
Yeah, I was reading Hamid's thing, and I saw the Ben, and I got stuck in my head. No, I'm pretty confident Eubank beats Ben, bro. I've always said that.
After Ben tested positive and Eubank lost to Liam Smith, I wasn't that interested in Ben fighting Eubank. Well,
here's the thing.
Ahmed, can you explain that to us? Because you're in the UK, but obviously you're in Wales, right? Which a lot of people forget even exists outside of the UK. You know, it's the three countries in Britain on the British main island. It's the smallest by far. It's England, then it's Scotland, then it's Wales. Do you think that's the same story in England, though, Ahmed?
Well, here's the thing, though. Yeah. But that loss actually helped the fight because it made it look like Conor Benn actually has a chance now, right? Because if Liam Smith can knock him out, imagine what a younger, more in his prime Conor Benn can do. So that kind of adds to it. But like, here's the thing: I always felt Chris Eubank Jr. would win this fight. There was never a point in time where I thought that Conor Benn could win this fight. Never a point in time. And I don't see how that changes after those two performances at 154 that he just had. So you look at here's the thing, man. So now you look at the situation with Liam Smith and Chris Eubank Jr. getting knocked out, and he comes back and he destroys Liam Smith. Very one-sided. Mm-hmm. But then you look at Conor Benn's last two performances, and you look at Chris Eubank Jr.'s last two performances. Chris Eubank Jr. won in impressive fashion in both of his last two performances. He won by a knockout emphatically, right? Mm-hmm. And then you look at what Conor Benn did. So the pendulum kind of swings back to Chris Eubank Jr. now based off of Conor Benn's last two performances above 147 where he looked lackluster even in winning. So now that kind of makes the fight a little bit more intriguing. And now that you have, this is turned into kind of like a soap opera, like a TMZ type thing, right? Where you have all the backstory now. Now the issue was the drug testing. So now the drug testing thing is still floating around out there, but it's not as significant, and it's not dominating the news, the portion of the promotion as much as now. Now these guys are battling for percentages now. Now when the finance is coming in, now that this adds more drama. So this is a never-ending soap opera that's taking twists and turns. So now, if the financial situation gets agreed upon, what's the next stumbling block they're going to throw in there to kind of add to this back and forth dilemma here? That's the thing you have to ask yourself. So I do think at the end of the day, I think Conor Benn will make the concession, and I do think that this fight will happen next. I do think this fight will happen next.
He's going to have to make the concession, and I'll tell you why, Joe. Because if he doesn't take this fight with Chris Eubank Jr., which, by the way, is a fight which he has a built-in excuse for losing. He was semi-active for the last 2 years. He's been dealing with all of this stuff, not just the hearings, but people like Simon Jordan talking about him, right, for the last 2 years, right? So he's been dealing with that. But he'd have to be going up in weight to take on a guy who's fought as high as 168 pounds. So he's got a built-in excuse for losing. And I'm 99.9% confident he loses this fight. Obviously, anything
Me too.
can happen in a fight. Anything can happen, Look at Klitschko versus Solis. I don't know if you remember that fight, round
I
one.
do.
Solis rolls his ankle, fight's over.
Mhm.
So these things can happen in boxing. But barring some freak injury like that, I have Chris Eubank Jr. winning this fight.
Well,
But here's the last part. What's the alternative? Mario Barrios. What's the excuse there?
well, here's the thing, too.
Anionis, what's the excuse there?
Well, here's the
Norman
thing,
Jr.,
too.
what's the excuse there? Boots, what's the excuse there? I mean, that's your weight class.
It
You get
is-
destroyed by those dudes, which you will, by the way.
Yeah.
There's no excuse. At
Here's
least with Chris Eubank Jr., there's an
Yeah.
excuse.
Well, here's the thing. So you take the Barrios fight, which is being labeled as a 50-50 fight, which in my opinion is probably a 65-35 fight, Barrios. That's just my opinion. You don't have to agree with it. But if you lose to Barrios, then I think the Eubank Jr. fight loses more luster. Whereas if you lose to Chris Eubank Jr., as you just alluded to, you can always go back and take the Barrios fight afterwards and saying, "Hey, man, I lost to a middleweight. I'm going back down to my regular weight class." So if you lose in your original weight class against a fighter who's supposedly 50-50 with you, if you can't beat a guy in your own weight class where you're 50-50 with, how are you going to sell the bigger fight with Eubank at the higher weight class? So the order of succession should be, let's go with Eubank first, then we'll go with Barrios. The Barrios fight is still doable with a loss to Eubank, whereas that Eubank Jr. fight loses its luster after a possible loss against Barrios. I think anyone who's being honest with that fight, who's in his camp right now, Eddie can say, he'll say that's a winnable fight against Barrios. But if he thinks that's a lock, I don't think Eddie believes that's a lock. I think Eddie knows that's a 50-50 fight. I think Eddie knows it's possible that Conor can lose that fight. This isn't a Peter Dobson you're going in there with. This is a Mario Barrios, tried and true, solid fighter. Earned his bones against a guy like Tank Davis. Very competitive fight before being stopped.
By the way, he was on a rehydration clause for that fight that we only found out about after the Ryan Garcia fight with Tank Davis.
Beat a former champion in Ugas very decisively. So this is a guy that is tried and true, who's definitely a solid top 10 guy at the weight class, and he's a champion at this point now. So if you lose to this guy, that sets you back more than a loss to Chris Eubank Jr. would. And you're going to be losing you're only going to be getting a third of the money, as Eddie alluded to, against Barrios, and your purse would only go that you would lose leverage in a negotiation with Chris Eubank Jr. coming off a loss to Barrios, because like what do you have now? What do you have now? You're not undefeated anymore. If you as I said before, if you can't win a title at 147 in a 50-50 fight, how are you going to sell the notion that you could beat someone at 160 after that? So it makes no sense. If I'm a manager here, and I know, I'm just an average fan, and I know Steve Kim likes to say, "Oh, these guys like to be manager," but I think this is a no-brainer. Like you got to take the Eubank fight first, because if you lose that Barrios fight, you lose leverage in a negotiation against Chris Eubank Jr. And I think it takes away a lot of the interest, intrigue, and luster from that fight coming off a loss to Barrios. So I don't think that's the right move. Now, does that mean I hate the Barrios fight? No, I would definitely be intrigued by it. I would definitely watch it. But if I'm going to be look at it from a managerial standpoint, if I'm in the management team of Conor Benn, there's no way I don't take that Eubank fight first. So my thing would be, okay, let's do 52-48. How's that?
Pugilism is really, really interested in a fight with Devin Haney.
Yeah,
if Ben can't beat Haney, then he gets the A side in a rematch series. Haney doesn't risk his rep because he's going up in weight, win-win business.
But here's the thing, man. Is the Haney fight really a huge fight either?
The biggest fight for Devin Haney to me
is Ryan
the
Garcia
rematch with Ryan Garcia. That fight sells itself.
Yeah.
In many respects, there's some similarity there because of the whole doping scandal thing, right? And
The thing is Haney.
it's kind of built up the fight a little bit.
The thing is Haney does not want to be a B-side in any. He has it stuck in his head, in my opinion, just by the way he's been carrying and comporting himself, that he thinks he's the A-side against everyone he fights. That's why the Shakur fight didn't happen. That's why the Tank Davis fight has kind of stalled a little bit, because he is probably offered a smaller amount of money that he wants to accept. Do you think that Haney is going to go into a Benn fight, and even though the fight will probably be in the UK, do you think Haney's going to accept being the B-side against Conor Benn? I don't. He's not going to sit there and say, this guy, he's going to sit there and say, and his team's going to say, and his dad's going to say, why am I going to go in there and take short money against a guy who's never been a champion before? Why is he going to do that?
No,
I just don't think. I think that fight is hard to make, and you say it's a winnable fight. I don't know that. That's another 50-50 fight that you could lose for significantly less money than you would get against a Eubank Jr. So these are two high risk fights, maybe not as higher risk as a Eubank Jr., or you could say equally high risk as Eubank Jr. I would disagree with that, but you can make the argument that they're all high risk. They're all high risk fights. You can make the argument that they're all high risk fights, but you and I would disagree that the Eubank Jr. is the highest risk out of all three of them. I think you and I would agree with that. Yeah. Maybe no one else, maybe not everyone else would.
Yeah.
But even with that being said, you got three high risk fights. Why not take the one with the most financial upside, which would be the Eubank Jr. one? Because none of these fights are a guaranteed win for Conor Benn.
Look, every fight for Conor Benn is an at-risk fight, in my opinion. What are we basing him on? Beating Chris Algieri? Like, that's his best win. And I love Chris. I know Chris. I see Chris all the time. He's from the New York area. He's at a lot of the fights. He pretty much works most of the Top Rank ESPN cards as the international broadcast guy, along with Christina Poncher, right? But that was not prime Chris Algieri. That was nothing close to prime Chris Algieri. I mean, that was a guy who was offered a sizable purse, and he's a fighter. There weren't really many other fights on the table for Chris at that point, and he was 3/4 the way out the door as a professional boxer.
That's right.
We're not rating it on Chris Algieri. We're rating it on Samuel Vargas. Really? So, I mean, what every fight at welterweight for Conor Benn is a at-risk fight. So, to your point, Joe, and to my point, you might as well go up to middleweight for a big purse and take a fight with at least a built-in excuse when you lose that will allow you to further on your career when you go back to your actual lower weight class.
Yeah. There's more to lose for Chris Eubank Jr. than there is for Conor Benn, in my opinion.
100%. And last thing, Joe, to discuss. What is it about the welterweight division? Why are there always these roadblocks, specifically it seems like in this division more than in other divisions? You remember the time of Terrence Crawford? He was on the top rank, quote unquote, side of the street, and everybody else from Keith Thurman to Danny Garcia to Errol Spence to Ugas to, you could go down the list of guys. Sean Porter was on the other side of the street. I thought we had resolved that. Right?
Yeah.
You could make an argument right now that it's actually worse of a bottleneck at 147, because you've got Brian Norman Jr. at Top Rank, who doesn't really seem to want to fight Boots Ennis. You've got Teo talking about being at welterweight, but doesn't want to even fight a guy in his own stable, because he was actually supposed to fight Brian Norman Jr. at the Garden that was what Top Rank was working on, and he didn't want to do it. Then you've got Stanionis. Then you've got the last piece there. The who we've been talking about, Mario Barrios.
Yeah.
What's with the bottleneck at welterweight? Go for it.
Well, here's what makes it even worse. There's no Errol Spence, and there's no Terrence Crawford down there now. So there's like who's the money man down there? Like, who are all these guys like waiting to fight? Who's the sweepstakes winner in a division that has no lottery, right?
That's such a great way of putting it.
That's the dilemma. So, and again, I've been saying this for almost 8 months to a year. Like, what the fuck is Boots doing staying down here, trying to unify in a division where you can go up to 154 and it just make substantially more money and be more comfortable? No one's gonna tell me that he's 154 is not a more comfortable weight for Boots Ennis. Looking at him on the scale these last couple weigh-ins, no one's gonna tell me that.
He's a tall guy, like for the weight.
He's a big guy, bro.
And it's not just his height; it's also his frame. It's his shoulders. He's I don't know.
He's a big guy, bro. He's a big guy, bro.
Let's bring on Hamed though. Hamed, what's good, fam? Happy Saturday out there in Wales.
Yeah, how's it going, guys?
Good. Man? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I just got back, so I didn't listen to everything you were saying, but I assume because I seen the headline, and I think like I listened to a minute earlier, is about Conor, Benn, and the Chris Eubank, that whole situation. I think Conor Benn should just try and fight Mario Barrios, because Mario Barrios seems like he may be the weakest champion at welterweight, and if Conor Benn is going to be able to get a immediate title shot after fighting guys like Peter Dobson and something Garcia, I forgot his first name. Was it Rodolfo, whatever his name? He hasn't really fought like a ranked opponent since I think he fought. Maybe it was Algieri. I don't even know if Algieri was ranked, but that was like before he got banned and the whole drugs fiasco. So if he's given the title shot, he should take it. It seems like they're still trying to make that Eubank fight. And I personally rather see both of these guys at least try and fight for a title, because Eubank is almost 36, I think. Is he 35 or something?
35.
He has not fought for a title since, I believe, the George Groves fight. That was 6 years ago. And Hamza Shiraz is already gonna fight for a title against Carlos Adames. So if Eubank could get that ladder fight, just take the fight. I don't know if he's gonna win that fight, but then they can maybe come back to this fight if they're that desperate. Because it seems
here's the thing. Here's the thing, Hamid. Not to cut you off, but
go on.
The other options both men have for each other. There's no guarantee that Chris Eubank Jr. could even beat Lara, even at Lara's advanced age, and there's no guarantee that Benn could beat Barrios. So both guys could lose in the interim and take away some of the interest in their fight. So why not do their? Here's the thing, man. Both guys can do the fight, and then they can have these other fights afterwards. I just think for Conor Benn, if he loses to Barrios, then that Chris Eubank Jr. fight becomes harder to make, and he loses leverage. From a business standpoint, it just makes no sense. Like, Conor Benn's 28 years old. He's 28 years old. Like he has more runway ahead of him, right? So why not take the money? Why not take the money fight first, then go back down to 147? Like Maestro and myself is saying, like, he could always say, I lost to the bigger guy at middleweight. I'm really 147 pounder.
Yeah, but this is what I'm trying to say. If he loses to Eubank first, then he tries to cut back down to welterweight. That's not going to be a great optic, I think, because we've seen what happened in the past with Brook and other fighters as well. But I think this will always be a big fight. I don't know if it'll be as big as they're trying to make it out, or like their dads were. But when Khan fought Brook, I'm not comparing the two. I think that was maybe a bigger fight, but they were both washed up, and that fight was at least I'd say I don't know, 6 or 7 years past this due by this. Some people were probably arguing it was almost a decade because I think that fight maybe should have happened in like 2012 or 13. But anyway, that fight was at least 6, 7 years past the Dubai day. And that still, I believe, sold out the O2 and did relatively well on box office with casual. So I think for me, I think if Eubank loses, it may be worse because he already has been knocked out and he's already lost every time he stepped up. And if he loses to a 42-year-old Lara and is like, say, a very one-sided fight, then maybe that will make it lose Leicester. But for me,
then the fight's done. You can't make the Benn fight after that.
But I think for Conor Benn is not. I think for Conor Benn is not a bad situation. If he beats Barrios, this fight will become bigger. He'll be actually a legitimate.
Listen
champion.
to what you just said. Even in the best case scenario for Conor Benn, he wins and beats Barrios. And what if Eubank loses to Lara? You need both guys to go into this fight first before they face the risk of losing. I think it's better these guys go in coming off of wins instead of coming off of losses.
No, I don't disagree, but we've seen Pacquiao again. I'm not comparing these guys to Mayweather. We've seen Pacquiao get knocked out, and I was immediately saying this fight won't be big, but that still was a big fight. I'm just saying AJ got knocked out by Ruiz. The AJ Walders fight still would have been big, or AJ Fury. I think it depends. If they both say get knocked out, like look what happened to AJ with Dubois. If Fury gets beaten up badly by Usyk, then maybe the Fury AJ fight will no longer be.
It's great. It's great that you pointed that out, Hamed, because that's going to be part number 2 of our Saturday show here. It's going to be on my channel. Link is in the description box. I want everyone to hit the like button if you're here now. Invite people to the party. Invite people to Ringside Reporter Live, one of the best boxing channels out there. You're going to catch shows here with me and Joe. On Saturdays, you've got the flagship show on the channel with the one and only Eric Lorta. That's 6 p.m. Eastern Sundays with my man Joe Habib, Ringside Reporter Live. Hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be going to part 2. We're going to talk Fury, Usyk Fury 2, who you got, how you got it. It's the biggest fight of the year, in my opinion.
I think so. You think so, Hamid?
And we're gonna talk about that in a
Definitely.
moment.
I don't even think anything comes close. But you guys seen what happened with the Nui Goodman fight. I think this is maybe the only intriguing fight left. I know there's some fights on this weekend, but to me they're all layups or tune-ups. And I still wanted to see a Nui fight. I don't know why they couldn't get someone in, but I think because they rescheduled it for January, they can't take a risk with him fighting, because that's gonna be like 2 fights in a month or something.
Let me ask you a question, because obviously we love talking across the pond.
Mm-hmm.
Is this fight really this fight with Eubank and Benn? Is this fight really as big as we're hearing from guys like Eddie Hearn, guys like
no.
I don't think. Are they going over the top with how much they're hyping this fight up?
Yeah. I do think it was maybe a bit bigger a couple of years ago, but Conor Benn, his name has not been in a good place with the whole PED scandal.
Yeah, so that hurt the fight. The PED scandal hurt the fight.
It wasn't just the fact that he tested positive, because we see like Dylan White and all this, is how they went about it. They were trying to go ahead with the fight even after he tested positive, and I don't think that story would have got leaked unless that guy was from the Daily Mirror who leaked it. So that whole thing wasn't a good look. And then there was a case where Eubank and Conor Benn was still going to fight until I think the Friday or the Thursday of the week of the fight. The British Boxing Board of Control overruled it. Even
that
even
wasn't
leaked.
Public, if that wasn't leaked, the fight very well could have gone off.
Yeah. That gave Eddie Hearn and Team Conor Benn a very bad rep. And then after Eubank got knocked out by Liam Smith, but they were trying to drain him, and his dad wasn't a fan of the fight. And it was revealed after that he had apparently tested positive in, I think, August, and it wasn't leaked or known or public record until I think it was October. So that whole thing was damaging. Then Eubank, I thought, was kind of drained for that first Liam Smith fight because he was getting down to 156, and then he had a quick turnaround and announced the fight with Liam Smith. I think it was in January of 23 or whatever. So that wasn't a good look. I don't know how big this fight will be, but I don't think is on the level of what they see, or even like fights like Khan and Brook, which that was a big fight, but that was way past this but like to me, that was like when Roy Jones and Hopkins fought in their rematch. I think this was probably a bit bigger because Sky picked it up with that Jones fight. I don't even think that was on a premium cable network. Like I remember that was same night as Hay and John Ruiz, and that wasn't on TV in the UK.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, that's interesting insight there.
One last thing.
Yeah,
Do you
go
guys
for it.
want to see that fight? Though?
Which-
I'm not really that interested.
Conor
Benn and
versus
Eubank.
Conor versus.
Yeah, I'm agnostic to it. I'm agnostic
I'm
to
the
it.
same way. I'm the same
Yeah.
way. I'm
If
not.
it happens, it happens.
I'm
If it doesn't, it doesn't. I don't care one way or the
I
other.
like Chris Eubank Jr. I've liked him for a long time. I know Joe does as well. I like the way he fights stylistically.
Yeah, I agree.
He's in exciting fights, and outside of the ring, he's one of the best characters in the sport. Listen, I like watching professional boxing. I like characters, right?
I agree.
If all I wanted if I just wanted to watch boxing and without the characters or anything, I'd just be watching amateur boxing all day. Like, we're here to talk professional boxing, all aspects of it, the business of it, the X's and O's of the sport, the technical preparation, the tactics inside the ring, and the drama and the business that goes on around it. So there you go. We're going to be live on my channel. Hit the like button before you go here. Support Ringside Reporter Live. Consider joining a membership and supporting some of the best content out there. And don't forget, 6 p.m. Eastern time, right? Every Sunday, that's 3 p.m. Pacific time, every Sunday. You can work that one out if you're in the UK, right? 6 + 5, that would be 11 p.m. UK time. It's Eric Lorda, it's Joe Habib, Ringside Reporter Live, flagship show right here. Make sure you tune in. So go over to my channel for part 2. Ahmed, you're welcome to join us there as well. We're going to be talking Fury, Usyk Fury 2, the biggest fight of the year, in my opinion, and we're going to talk about it in a short moment. So join us over there. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and drop a comment if you're watching on demand. Let us know what you think about Eubank versus Benn. Take care, everyone, and enjoy your Saturday.